Welcome to an empty gallery. If you're looking to look around downstairs, you'll see this really is turnover week here. All of our shows coming and going, which tends to happen. But welcome, we're really pleased you're here. You just have to look here and here to know why we're so excited, and this is really only half the story. There's a whole house and story around where these portraits will live that we'll also hear about tonight. Before we begin, I want to make a little plug for a really crazy good concert. I think you all have these on your chairs. Amistad Kia is Grammy nominated, touring Europe, selling out Red Rock Amphitheater. Really a wonderful singer-songwriter, and she's just the headliner. There are 5 performers total. It's Saturday, March 11th, and it's a benefit concert. All of the funds raised support our work and the work of World in supporting musicians and artists and cultural events in the Valley. So if you can come, please do it. It'll be a great night. If you can't come, just help spread the word. We would appreciate that. You know, a good place to begin for this evening's introduction is actually this room. Because as of 10 o'clock this morning, this room held 100 of Willie Richardson's hats in the show Hatitude. Were most of you able to see Hatitude? Yeah. So you saw that it was, you know, on the one hand, just a beautiful show, an extraordinary collection. I'm sorry, Willie didn't like it when you said the word collection. Collection for her was too impersonal. These were not collectibles, these were the clothes and the hats that she wore. So I shouldn't say the word collection. But it was you know, a tribute to a hat lover and a woman who had a lot of taste, as you could tell. But we got to know Willie in her capacity with Oregon Black Pioneers when she and Gwen Carr and others came to us long before we knew about her hats and challenged us to think differently about the Bush House Museum. And Willie and her colleagues basically said, the story you're telling about Asa Bush is a half-truth, and a half-truth is a lie. Tell the full story. And part of the story is about Asa Bush's worst sins and instincts, and we shouldn't hide from his actions. But part of the story are the people in Oregon whose stories were never told. Asa Bush takes up all this space, and people like him, and people like Beatrice, Morrow, Cannady don't get their story told. So what we're doing tonight, Jeremy's paintings, Tammy Jo's work at Bush House Museum, really is a response to a result of Willie and Gwen and their colleagues challenging us. So I think this space, which a few hours ago held 100 beautiful hats, really is a great place for this. It was a long way of saying hats off to Willie, who's still with us. So to introduce Jeremy, I want to introduce the new Director of Programming at Bush House Museum. We got to know Tammy Jo Wilson exactly a year ago. She curated a show in this space called Black Matter that included Jeremy and 10 other Oregon-based Black artists. People were like, wow, what a great show, hire Tammy Jo. And I was like, that's good advice. And so we did. We're thrilled with her, and please welcome Tammy Jo Wilson.
Hi everybody. I'm so glad to be here. I was just, before I came up, having a moment going back to that Black Matter exhibition. I hope some of you, most of you got to see it. And Jeremy's work was actually right over here. He had a nice selection of work and everything and all the amazing things that have come from that exhibition in my relationship with SAA and at Bush House Museum. And even just on the other side of this wall, another artist from Black Matter is now regularly doing work and changing murals in this space. And so I'm very excited about the relationship with SSA and Bush House Museum. I'm very honored to introduce Jeremy and these beautiful works. They are significant. They are not just a temporary exhibit that we are showing. We are investing in this work, and Jeremy and these stories and these narratives. They have been purchased as part of our permanent collection. Our intention is to continue this work, to continue supporting this series, to continue investigating and finding these narratives and sharing them with the community, and taking this series of work that we plan to grow out there and sharing with other institutions and other communities. It'll be an amazing thing as we see this body of work that we're just seeing these first two pieces come together. And we can look to additional works in our new Waldo Vogel Gallery over at Bush House Museum that is just in the process of maturing into itself. As more Jeremy's work comes through and more contemporary art and conversations about our history and the narratives surrounding this place, that place, and this state where we live happen through contemporary art. So with that, I would like to introduce Jeremy Okai Davis to give us a little bit of background on this amazing work that he has created.
Thank you all for being here. I like to record myself so I can go back and judge myself. Because I'm an artist, obviously, but I'm not a public speaker necessarily, so I get a little nervous, so bear with me. It should be fine, but just so preface for this. So in the talk, I'm going to talk about these pieces, but before I get there, I'm going to do a little bit of kind of a backstory on myself as an artist and how I got from basically point A as a artist to this point, and being here right now talking about these pieces, and my interest in doing these kind of like historical type paintings. So to start, we'll go ahead to the first slide. I'm just going to do like a little kind of a Cliff Notes version of like my life before I got to Oregon. I'm from Charlotte, North Carolina, born and raised in Charlotte, North Carolina. From a very early age, I've been an artist and been interested in art and drawing. Like most children, I drew. My brother and I was an 80s kid, so like my brother and I would draw Transformers, like make up our own Transformers and G.I. Joes, and like I knew from a very early age that I loved art and I loved drawing and I loved the way it made me feel. So I just kept doing it as I went on into my life. But around like 8th grade or so, like once I got into middle school, basketball kind of took over, which I'll talk about. I'll get back to the sport side of my life, but basketball kind of took over. I don't know how many of you all are NBA fans, but the Charlotte Hornets came to Charlotte in 1987, and I kind of fell in love with them, but also my dad was a basketball coach, and my uncle played in the NBA, my cousin played in the NBA, so it kind of felt like that's what I was supposed to do at that point in my life. So basketball became like first and foremost for me, and then art kind of took the back seat, but it was still there. I was always doing it. Fast forward to college, I actually got a degree to play, or a scholarship to play junior college basketball, and realized once I got there that I didn't have the love that it took to like be like that type of an athlete, because it took a lot of my time and took a lot of my art time away and a lot of my like fun time away. So I kind of gave up my aspirations of playing playing in the NBA, which was probably never going to happen. But moved back to Charlotte, North Carolina, and got in the art program at UNC Charlotte, and that's kind of when painting kind of took first and foremost, and I started looking at it as something that I could do for a career. But I also took a bunch of graphic design classes at the same time, which kind of comes into play. I'll talk about a little bit of the graphic design influence in my pieces. But yeah, moved back to Charlotte, graduated in 2002, spent about 5 years in Charlotte, trying to get a foothold there, get my work out, but was having kind of a hard time because Charlotte's a big city. It's a nice city, but it's also not the most like art forward culturally. And I just had a hard time getting going with an art career. So I started early on thinking about like where I could move and end up where art could take like be a bigger part of my life. So I traveled around a little bit, just visiting different cities, and I came to Portland. I had no idea what Portland was. My friend was living here, and I came out here for a festival, a concert, and got here and just fell in love with Portland and saw the different art, like cafes and coffee shops that had art. And I go back to Charlotte and think about like, this feels like a slight, because I showed at cafes, but there's like an idea of what art looks like when you go to coffee shops. And when I got to Portland, that wasn't what I saw. There was like legitimate, like, that feels bad, say legitimate. Like gallery ready work in coffee shops, and it felt like a good place. When I saw that, it felt like a good place for me to come and kind of reintroduce myself into like a different art world and get some new inspiration. So 6 months after going back to Charlotte, I moved out here. So 2007, I got to Portland, and yeah, just kind of hit the ground running. Go to the next slide. When I got here, I kind of viewed it as, I was 27, so still trying to figure things out like in my life. So there was a lot of figuring out, but also a lot of fun things happening, like just like going out and hanging out. So the paintings that I was doing at that point kind of mirrored that. Like they were just like these loose, kind of carefree, fun paintings. Not a lot of substance to them. I think when I was doing them, I felt a little bit more like, I felt like there was something, I was figuring out something, but when I think back, I was really just like having fun. And also, when I think about that time in Portland, like moving, like those first few years, it felt almost like second college in a way. And I was like experimenting with like adding text to pieces and some of the graphic elements that you'll see in my paintings more now were kind of getting introduced, and I was just playing with the idea of how to paint people. And it was also kind of around the time, a little bit before I got here, I started, and if you see the pieces like up close, you'll see this kind of like pixelated style that I use. This is kind of when I don't say mastered it, but this is kind of when I started like really pushing it. Because early on, before I got to Portland, I did a body of work, a series of paintings that were just based off of these little tiny photos that I had on my dad's computer. When I blew them up, I started seeing the pixels kind of come out, different colors come out. So I basically just tried to paint like that. So I call it looks like pointillism, but I call it painting pixels when I'm thinking about, when I'm doing it. So around this time is when I started like, really getting into that style of painting people. And we go to the next slide. So that was the first like 5 years or so when I was in Portland showing there. And during that time, I showed at a couple different galleries, mostly at coffee shops. But from showing my work so much, I got asked to be in a show and I'm spacing on the name of the gallery, but it was curated by another artist in Portland, Modu Jang, and he wanted to show a lot of the pieces that were in that previous slide, but he also at the same time wanted me to do a self-portrait, which ended up being this piece here, which is kind of funny. It's a self-portrait, but I cropped my head off completely. I hadn't painted myself aside from like college assignments, And I didn't feel super comfortable painting myself or like investigating myself that much and staring at myself for hours trying to, so I cropped my head off, but compositionally, I think it's really interesting. I thought it was really cool, and some of the things, like the things that I'm holding, represented more of like who I am. There's a roll of film in my right hand there, and my dog's leash in my left hand, who passed away a couple years ago, but at that point he was like, that was my guy. So yeah, and there's some buttons on my shirt that kind of reference like my history and things. But I had a really good time doing that painting, and in that show, kind of realized that instead of doing paintings like the previous ones that were more outwardly like kind of judging not myself but like the society and the world and a whole, like doing paintings that were more personal and about myself started taking precedent, and kind of gave me felt like gave me more purpose as an artist. So with that, after that piece, I did these other paintings that were all included in a show that I had at Stumptown Gallery, a coffee shop in Portland, that actually, so the basis of these paintings, it was in a show called Makes the Man, and at that time I was investigating things from my personal history that I remembered from my youth, and most of the images in that are from Ebony and Jet magazines, which again comes back into play later in these slides. But Ebony and Jet magazine were two magazines published by Johnson Publishing that my parents just always had around the house. And I remembered it, and I remember flipping through them and being interested in them, which could, like, just I work as a graphic designer in my day job, which is, I do like print media stuff. So it could be my early interest in print media and layout. But I did these paintings that were kind of based around some of the advertisements that popped up in those magazines. And I was really proud of the work. And one of the paintings in the show, go to the next slide, was a painting that I did called Makes the Man. This is the piece here. It's kind of like the title track for the show. And I bring this one up because it kind of serves as the impetus of another change in my career. And showing this piece at that gallery and then posting it on the internet, somehow, some way, I never really got the answer. It was seen by some of the curators at the Studio Museum of Harlem, which is a world-renowned, highly reputable museum that when I did those paintings for the coffee shop for Stumptown, never envisioned that they would travel across the country to this legendary museum. So this piece was chosen and showed at the museum, and you can go to the next slide. One of the things that I went to New York for the opening, and I bring this up because it was a shift in my career, but it was also I feel like artists through their career, they need these little boosts every so often, because you're so alone in the studio and putting your art on walls. You're kind of exposing yourself, and a lot of times you're not getting the feedback that you want. And getting this piece exhibited in Harlem at the Studio Museum, and then seeing it there when I went was, I don't know, it was just one of those moments in my career that just shifted everything. And I remember going to the opening and walking in, and it's not as obvious here, but this is the first thing you see when you walk in. And in this show, I was with Glenn Ligon, Theaster Gates, and Ellen, artists that I just saw in books, that I looked up to. And exhibiting with them, I don't know, it just kind of reminded me that I was on the right path, I was doing the right thing. On top of that, so Kerry James Marshall was also in the show, and I knew about him as an artist, and this is kind of one of the big pivotal moments that changed my career. I knew about him as an artist, but I'd never really investigated his work that much. But being in the show, I loved the pieces that he had in it. I got back to Portland and I started investigating him a little bit more, and read some articles, watched some videos on YouTube of him, and there was one interview that he did, and you can go to the next slide, one interview that he did where he was referencing his, when he was younger, he would go to these like cafes with other artists and have conversations with artists, or artists were having conversations around him, and those artists were like having these like huge conversations that didn't necessarily revolve around art. There were other things, and in that moment he realized that if he wanted to be an artist like them, an artist too, he would have to be able to do that, have to have those conversations and know those things. He would have to like know something, like the work that he was doing would have to inform him, would have to inform others. It would have to be more than just like pretty pictures. And that was kind of a pivotal point. This is around 2015. So it also was around the time Trump got elected. There was a lot of images and videos of black people being killed by cops. So that was obviously front of my brain. You can go to the next slide. So at that point, I started making these paintings. I was in this show called Recycled Rain that the three at the top and the one in the middle were in that show. And in doing that work, I was trying to make work that was a little less concerned, that was more concerned with my place in the world and why I felt the way I felt in that moment around that time. So the images and the people that I chose for those paintings were some friends, some images that I found online of people. A lot of them are mugshots. The show was called Recycled Rain, and the challenge with the show was that we had to collect rainwater and use that in some way in the painting. So the way that I ended up using it was, instead of doing like, in my paintings you can see there's like kind of a thicker application that I use, but in these pieces I cut my paint with water and did these washes first, and then did the paintings on top of that. But in using this recycled water, I was trying to think of something else that I could use that was recycled or like a natural material. So that's when the wood elements kind of came into play, which kind of come and go into my paintings. But in thinking about the wood elements, I chose them because most of it was either stuff that I found on the street or that I got from the recycling center in Portland. It was things that were like discarded or thrown away or not thought about. And when I saw them, I saw beauty in them. And that kind of reminded me of like the African American experience. A lot of the things that we've been through, not considered, thrown out. The wood elements kind of served as a symbolism for that. So that's what those four paintings were about. The two ones that kind of flanked them on the bottom were in a show that I had called An Education, where again I was kind of looking at myself. There were 10 paintings in that show, and I was attempting to do another self-portrait body of work that didn't include like an actual portrait of myself. So this piece here is one of my mom, brother, and sister when they were younger. And the one over there is my father, who was a basketball coach, as I mentioned, and my older brother when he was a baby. But this one here, actually, my mom was pregnant in that photo, so I do make kind of an so I did that show, and again, was like investigating myself. So I hadn't quite gotten to the point of the idea of knowing something that I learned from, that I wanted to experience, or wanted to try out with, from the quote from Carrie J. Marshall. And I'm forgetting how my slides go, but I think that you can go to the next one. Yeah, so I had another show in 2019. I was given a fellowship through Stumptown to do like a body of work for their gallery downtown, for the coffee shop downtown that has these huge walls. So I wanted to do really big work, and I wanted to use that idea of knowing something or learning something over the course of doing the paintings. So years prior, I had heard about these Shirley cards, which are, it's written there, but Shirley cards were reference cards for Kodak that they used to calibrate film. And up until probably the 80s, the figures that they used in those were always a Caucasian woman with these colored blocks. It's like CMYK, RGB colored blocks on the grayscale. And I don't know if any of these have it, but in some of them, it'll have the term normal, as this is the normal exposure. And it bugged me when I first heard about them, but I didn't really know why. And then when I was thinking about doing the body of work, kind of came to me that in using these cards, there was a disregard for darker skin tones. So essentially, the body of work that I made for Stumptown ended up being these black Shirley cards, basically. So just show a few of them. And again, I was using images from Jet and Ebony and some of the more African-American focused lifestyle magazines. And then also using some of these, the grayscales and color blocks. Some of the symbolism that pops up in these paintings and some more paintings that you see kind of starts to make an appearance. This kind of chevron pattern that is kind of faint in both of these in the background started popping up. I was thinking about with this as symbolism. It was meant to be like I think I get to it a little bit later in the talk. Actually, I'll talk about it a little bit later. But yeah, this kind of symbolism starts to pop up in the pieces. And then I had another show. After the show at Stumptown, I started working with a gallery in Portland, Elizabeth Leach Gallery. And I had another show in 2020 where I was still kind of investigating that Shirley card idea, but also looking at historical, like some of the magazines. I was still using Jet and Ebony as source material, but I was trying to imagine the stories of some of the subjects of the pieces. This is a woman named Dorothea Towles, who was a model that popped up in a lot of the magazines. Like she would do some of the earring ads, and this image is from one of her earring ads, but she did a lot of covers for the magazine. So I started looking at her, and I used her in a lot of the paintings. And then I also did, the show that I did was called Blackwood, where basically I was imagining if the Shirley cards had been more fair, would that have given like African American women or people a better opportunity in Hollywood? So I was basically thinking about an idea of like a black Hollywood. And then these images were also from the covers of Jet magazines, and I was trying to view them as like these like Hollywood starlets and trying to prop them up more than they were propped up in the moment. So that's what those pieces were about. So I only have a few of those slides on here. After that show, I did another show with Elizabeth Leach Gallery called A Good Sport, which was again trying to reference history a little bit. But in this one, I was thinking about my time as an athlete and my dad as a coach and what life was like for him. He played basketball also in the 60s and 70s, and it made me think about like what life was like him as a black athlete in small town North Carolina. He played at a school called Warren Wilson, right outside of Asheville. And I started considering thinking about ideas of kind of the prominence of African Americans in sports now versus the path that they had to take, and the fact that they had to be good sports in a sense as they waited their turn. So I did these paintings that were about the kind of the history and struggle of African Americans in sport. I think it was struggles. And this one is a painting of my dad's basketball team. He's the only black fellow there at the top. And this picture, he passed away a couple years ago. We found this picture when we were cleaning out the house, and it hit me in a different way, seeing it, so I wanted to do this painting of it. And this one's pretty large. This one's 5 foot by 7 foot. Doing this show at the gallery gave me the opportunity to like expand the scale of my work, which is a lot of fun, because I think with this body of work that I'm doing for the Bush House Museum, there's going to be some larger pieces included. So yeah, this show gave me like the opportunity to kind of play around with scale. This one also is 5 foot by 7 foot. Again, thinking about like historical people that didn't get the acknowledgement or shine that they may have deserved. This is a guy named Gene Denson who played in the Negro League, and the story that I read was that he was considered for to be the guy that got to go up and be the first black baseball player in the major leagues. But from what I understood, he was a little bit older is one of the reasons, but also he was not necessarily the good sport that they wanted to be the person to jump up there. It ended up that Jackie Robinson also wasn't. He put his foot down quite a bit, but I wanted to do this painting to kind of highlight the other black athletes, black baseball players that were important back then. But about him also, he ended up playing on a travel baseball team with Jackie Robinson before Jackie went up, and served as kind of a mentor for him. So he gave him a lot of the, this is what's going to be happening to you kind of spill when they were traveling with that travel team. Here's one of Jackie Robinson that I did. And I referenced my uncle playing basketball in India. This is a painting of Walter Davis. Played for the Suns, get drafted by the Suns, played for the Nuggets. From my remembrance of him was in the 80s playing for the Denver Nuggets, but he actually played for the Blazers for half a season, and he got traded back to the Nuggets before he retired. This is a guy named Jimmy Wingfield, again thinking about historic African Americans, black people. He was the last horse jockey to win the Kentucky Derby. He won it 2 years in a row, and then ended up getting kind of banned from horse racing in the States. There's a whole book about him that I've kind of read the cliff notes on, but there's a very interesting story that he's had through his life, so I wanted to do this painting kind of highlighting him. Russell. This is called Summit. And these two are just these are youth sport paintings that I played like youth basketball growing up, and in these paintings I was thinking about like kind of youthful innocence in sport, and not really thinking about the race as much. Like when you're young and playing basketball with all races, you're just out for the common cause. So I did these paintings kind of highlighting that. It was like almost like a moment of like joy in the body of work. These two paintings. We can go to the next one. So during that body of work and like years prior, like around 2020, I think I worked on this piece, and there's another one after this that kind of serve as a preface to these paintings that I'm doing now for the Bush Museum. This one is a painting of Harry T. Moore, who was, and I painted like, these paintings ended up being in a group show that I was in 2020, and I don't really remember why I chose, I know why I chose, but I was investigating and thinking about African Americans that, again, didn't get highlighted the way that maybe they should have at the time, but also thinking about my lack of knowledge in my history and people that did amazing things and very pivotal things over the course of history that I didn't learn about when I was younger. So just about Harry T. Moore, he was an educator in Florida, a pioneer for the civil rights struggle. He started the NAACP chapter in, I think, Brevard County, Florida. He also highlighted a number of injustices that happened to people in Florida, and for that, like he was going against the cops and the Klan and doing these things in Florida, and he ended up getting assassinated. I believe it was the Klan put a bomb under his house, and he died. I think his wife may have lived, I don't remember exactly, but he died. But I bring this up because this was the 40s. I think he died in like the early 50s, prior to like what most people know when the civil rights like struggle like actually began, like when people started highlighting it. But he was like a precursor to a lot of that struggle. So I did this painting in order to like kind of highlight him and bring exposure to him. You can go to the next one. Same with this piece. This is Polly Murray, who was a author, civil rights activist, gender equality advocate, that I just had no idea who she was. I'm sure other people know who. So the thing is, like, a lot of these paintings are about my lack of education in knowing, and I always feel like if I don't know who these people are, there's probably plenty of other people in my shoes that also don't know. So in doing these paintings, I'm learning about them, learning their history, but also, hopefully, other people that come and see these pieces in the show will have the same curiosity and interest in them that I have, which kind of, again, speaks to these two pieces that I did for this exhibit, which brings me to these, which obviously you saw here next to me. And I guess I'll talk a little bit how the commission came about to do them. Like Tammy Jo mentioned, I was part of the Black Matter exhibit that she traveled around. Started in Corvallis, went to Newburgh, and then here. And in showing here, I met Matthew, and I mean, he probably could tell. I guess he liked my paintings. And we had a long conversation. I think it was after the opening. I can't remember exactly when it was, but we had a conversation. We walked outside. I talked a lot about like what I was doing with. I think it was before I started the Good Sports Show. So he gave me some ideas for some of the people that I would look up, and we talked a lot about that. But it also kind of was the genesis for the start of this project. Talked with Matthew, and then Matthew and my gallery connected and kind of discussed like the scope of what we were doing and what it could become. Kind of laid the groundwork for the project, and, which is funny, I guess it was, since it was like a year ago that we started this conversation. So yeah, it's nice to be here at this point, talking about the pieces after it just being a conversation for a while. But yeah, so that's what got me to this project. So just to talk a little bit about this piece and these paintings, I kind of approached them the same way I approached those previous two paintings, and also the Good Sport paintings, where I was looking at their histories and responding to the histories while I was painting the pieces, and trying to, in working on them, and also like reading about them and watching videos about them, tell their stories through the portraits in a way. Like I wanted the emotion of their lives to come through in the paintings. In choosing Ben Johnson, at first I was kind of struck by his gaze, the photo that I chose, which is more of like I think a waist up photo. But I was really keyed in on his eyes and his face. It just felt, when I looked at it, it looked worn, like he had been through a lot, but his pose just felt so strong. and there was strength in it. And in his eyes, there was like, I don't know, there was just something about it. And the same with the Beatrice piece. They both had this like quiet like strength through adversity that came through in the photos. That in doing the paintings, I wanted that to come through as well. So just a little bit, and I'll say, I meant to say this earlier, I'm doing these historic paintings and thinking about these people, but by no means am I a historian. So I'm going to read a little bit about him. Gwen will be the person to talk to about the facts. So Ben Johnson came to Oregon in 1853. He worked as a blacksmith, and he gained respect as a blacksmith and a business owner and homeowner in Jackson County. I think he mostly lived in Jackson County. Later in his life, he reconnected with who will become his wife, Amanda Gardner, and they married in Oregon. They lived a full life, and to me, in reading about him, like, he had successes, he had failures, trials, tribulations, all the things that come along with like being a person in this world. Basically like the American dream in a sense. And I wanted to do a painting that kind of paid respect to that, like the life that he lived and the work that he put in. And that's what I was attempting to do with this painting. The other painting is Beatrice Morrow Cannady. Again, I was struck by her gaze in the images that I saw. I chose image of her, which I think was a little bit later in life. Not later in life, like probably into her 40s, I guess. But there's some, in the picture, there's some gray hairs. You can see her gray hairs, and I don't know, something about that stuck out to me. So I wanted to make sure that that was highlighted in the painting as well. And again, just to give her a strength and a history in the painting. So she came to, I don't know exactly when she moved to Portland, but her thing is she worked at a newspaper called The Advocate, which can't really see it here, but if you look at the painting close, in the red, on her top there, you can see the word advocate is kind of repeated, the same way I did the blacksmith in this piece. She worked at a newspaper called The Advocate, which at the time was the largest black-owned newspaper, which is also kind of a nice, in choosing her, I was thinking about that in exhibiting this piece in the Bush House, considering that Asa Hill was also a newspaper person, so I thought that was a nice counter. They were doing the same thing but telling completely different stories, or interesting different stories. She was also the founding member of the Portland chapter of the NAACP. She worked really hard as an advocate for discrimination that faced African Americans in like restaurants and theaters and hotels. She was just a very impactful person during her time in Portland and in Oregon, and I wanted to paint to highlight that and show her impact that she had. Go to the next one. I was going to talk a little bit more. So in the paintings, if you get close, there's a magnolia flower that I used in both on her necklace and on his vest. I was trying to think of something that would tie the two paintings together, and eventually all the paintings that I do will be tied together through some sort of usage of the magnolia flower. When I was looking for something to include, I was thinking about, again, my history and what flower I wanted to choose. Growing up, we always had, in the first house that we lived in, there was a magnolia tree in our front yard, and I remember just always loving it. And moving to Portland and walking around, whenever I see the magnolia trees, it like automatically like takes me back to my youth and childhood. So it's kind of a nod to me and my personal history, but also when I was looking it up, some of the words that describe that they use as symbolism is high status, perseverance, dignity, and nobility. And those are basically the four things that I wanted these paintings to kind of inhabit, is that dignity and nobility and strength. So I felt like that was a good usage of symbolism to include in the paintings. And moving forward, I wanted to show a couple of the people that I was considering for the next couple of paintings that I'm going to be doing. This is a woman named Sybil Harbor, who born enslaved. She arrived in Lakeview, Oregon in 1888 and worked doing housework and cooking. But she was also a midwife, and I guess at that point in Lakeview there wasn't a hospital, so she delivered during that time a lot of the babies in the area. And also, from what I read, she performed surgeries, which is crazy to think about. So she was like a very highly respected person in that area. So I thought that she might be a nice one to include in the series. So still playing around with who the next person is going to be, but she might be one. The next one. Lewis Southforth is another one I was considering. Again, born into slavery, moved to Oregon Territory with his enslaver, and from what I understand, he earned money playing his fiddle, and essentially earned enough money to purchase his own freedom, is what I understood from what I read, which is incredible. So in the painting, I'll probably find some way to include him as a musician, but I found this is the only image that I could find of him, the one on the far side there, as a younger person. And I don't know if it comes across in the image there, but I love, again, the strength that he has in the picture, just thinking about probably what he was going through at that time. So I'm thinking about portraying him as in his younger self in the painting. That's another consideration. And then the last group, this is Miracle Waldo Bogle, is it Bogle or Bogle, and her family. Born in Missouri, 1844, came to Oregon on a wagon train, and she married Richard in 1863. And there's a crossover here. She was married by Obed Dickinson, and when they were married, there was a lot of controversy surrounding it because both races, all races were at the wedding, and Asa Held Bush was not into it. And he published in his newspaper. He published some negative things about it, called it shameful. So I'm excited to get started on this piece. I love the family portrait, so I think the painting that I do is going to be this family portrait in a larger scale, a little bit bigger than the ones I'm doing now. Since she is the namesake of the gallery one over there. So yeah, I think that's this one and to be determined are the next two paintings that I'm going to be doing. And down there is just a little sketch that I did, just really quickly. But yeah, that basically wraps up everything. So I appreciate you guys listening. I don't know if anybody has any questions.